Welcome back to Q 2015. I'm Chris Walsh, and we are here at ITM Live with Sugata Mitra, who has just finished his great keynote here at Q, and welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
Standing ovation.
So thank you very much. I was very surprised and grateful when that happened.
Well, I think you've tapped into what so many people can really identify with about what learning really is. And so we'll get to that in a second. But thank you again for being here. I think I told you that we featured you in one of our very first episodes of the Infinite Thinking Machine, and it was a great match because the Infinite Thinking Machine is all about helping everybody meet their potential with the help of digital technologies, and that's what you're doing. So it's a great fit. But where I wanted to start our conversation was really just a personal note. I read that you mentioned that your background is as a physicist, and you had a number of successes, in working in energy storage and even organic semiconductors, and you could have just stayed in that direction. Why did you get involved with education? How'd that happen?
Well, I wish there was a deep and wise answer to that, but there isn't. The answer is actually very simple. Money. I was 26.
Wait. Education is not the right direction to go.
Hang on. Hang on. I was 26 years old with a PhD in theoretical physics. The only options you have with that is to become a teacher of physics, okay, or to become a research assistant.
Because it's theoretical.
Because, well, whatever. I mean, physicists, unlike engineers, they're not employed all that much by the industry, or at least they weren't in those days. But we were the only people who knew how to write computer programs in those days, in the late 70s. So the whole lot of PhDs in physics got hired as computer programmers.
My father-in-law did the same exact thing. Absolutely.
And computer programmers were getting paid considerably more than research assistants. And then after a few years of writing computer programs, my boss said to me, there's even more money in teaching other people how to write programs. So that's how I got into teaching other people how to write programs, and very quickly realized that the teaching profession was the most boring thing that anyone could ever dream of doing. So I used to ask my students, I used to show them a program and say, guess what this is? And they'd say, well, it looks like a poem. So I'd say, it's not a poem, it's called a program. So they'd say, so what does it do? And I'd give them all a copy and say, that's what you have to figure out. Because I figured that that's easier than my standing there and hollering at them. So anyway, so those were the reasons how I got into this whole business of training and education and so on. And that's sort of is almost like accidental.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, we're glad for the happy accident for sure. Well, part of what you just described is really people learning on their own. And you are one of the pioneers of this concept of minimally invasive education. Why do you think that works?
Well, I've been trying to figure that out myself. But the thing is that, like anything else in nature, nature favors the method where the minimum amount of effort produces the maximum output. Whereas in a lot of our engineering, we seem to have forgotten that. And we seem to equate effort with output. And so more effort and more output. That's not how nature works. So also in those days, I was working with a hospital because a doctor, one of these keyhole surgery doctors, he wanted me to work out a program for getting better quality visuals from inside our bodies. And from him, I learned the term minimally invasive surgery.
Right.
At the same time, I was doing the hole in the wall. So just out of jest, when somebody once asked me, so what's this experiment about? I said, it's minimally invasive education.
It's great. It's a great term. It's a great term. Now, you mentioned the hole in the wall, and so and that's well documented, so we don't need to talk about it here necessarily, but I'm curious what you thought would happen. When you designed that experiment, clearly you had hopes and some idea of where it could go, but what did you really think would happen?
I thought, well, I knew that the self-learning would happen because all the rich people, in those days, in 1999, only rich people could afford computers. Right. They were like, $5,000, $10,000 and things like that. So I had a few friends like that, and all of them would say, you know, my little boy or my little girl, I think she's gifted. So I would say, why? Oh, the other day, you know, she did this fantastic thing on the computer. So then I thought that it can't be possible that the children of rich people are gifted. There must be something we're missing out there. So it's just that those other kids don't
That's
have
what they
access.
think, though.
So there must be. So that was really the reason. I wanted to see what would they do, and would they be just as quick as the other children, or would they be slower? Would they need instruction? In those days, I used to think that an occasional little help, if offered, will help them to quickly catch up.
A nudge, yeah.
What came as a surprise was that that little bit of help would often hinder rather than not offering any help at all. That I didn't guess.
Help from anyone or specifically adults?
Help from a helpful, knowledgeable
Expert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we can do without that.
Yeah. So they're obviously they're with the success of the hole in the wall. There's been some criticism as well. The two things I think I've heard the most are one about retention. You know, are students retaining what they're learning when they learn in this way? And two, in particular in the hole in the wall, there might have been some gender bias there because the boys sort of took over in some cases. And I noticed in many of your examples here today, you had girls in their own groups, which of course would negate that. But tell me a little bit about how you sort of address those criticisms.
Well, the first one about retention, that's got resolved very recently, and it's in fact now published, because I have actually published data to show that the retention is higher with things which children find out for themselves than with things which they hear from someone else. In retrospect, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? You find out something for yourself, you remember it longer anyway. The second point about the hole in the wall, now that, it kind of irritates me in a way. What would happen is that a passing journalist would look at one of the old installations somewhere and say, I just ran into one of Mitra's installations. The computer is not working. This is rubbish. So I would say, but that's an experiment done 16 years ago for a very specific purpose. Why would that?
It's not still working today?
No, many of them aren't. Almost all of them aren't. It's like looking at a broken down Mercedes and saying that cars don't work.
Right.
So that's one. The other is about this gender bias. Somebody would walk up to a computer in the wall in Delhi or somewhere, suddenly see a whole bunch of boys chasing out girls. Conclusion, boys dominate the hole in the wall. But I have a village in South India where the girls used to come in packs of 20.
To overpower the boys.
Yes.
I love it, like dolphins
and
going against the sharks.
They used to just take over like that. And there were 2 computers. They did this for about a week. And obviously the boys were the ones who were complaining, so we don't get a chance because they come in, and they used to bring sticks and things like that. And they're coming in packs. And then after 2 weeks, I didn't do anything. Thank God I didn't do anything. Anybody else would have said intervene. I didn't. Guess what happened after 2 weeks? I went back. Written in chalk on top of one computer was boys, on top of the other, girls. They solved the administrative problem by themselves. So
they segregated it. But they got it done. That's
great.
It done.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Now, you talk a lot about SOLs, self-organized learning environments, which a lot of times hinge on big questions, which, of course, here in the United States, we have a long history, and probably the UK too, around inquiry-based learning, but it's a small but passionate group who've really kind of mastered that. But you said today that even if we change that, assessments still have to change. And of course, you're a fan of peer assessments. I am as well. And you reference sort of the workplace as sort of that parallel. Of course, we know in the workplace too, though, there's certifications and you have to pass your exams to become a lawyer or a doctor and so on. So I'm curious, how do we as just humans constantly run up against these summative tests that are keep holding us back from what we know really works with peer-based, informal, inquiry-driven education?
Yeah, but I think it's a consequence of the old administrative machinery where there was this pressure on time. And we haven't actually, to be very honest, the hole in the wall, it's a wonderful method, but it's not as quick as the classroom. Unfortunately, the classroom produces quick learning, which is not retained for very long. The hole in the wall produces slow learning, but it retains it for a long time. So similarly, in the admin system, when people are taken in, you need a dipstick thermometer to say, who's this guy? How much does he know? So you make that one test. If you pass the test, you get the job. You fail the test, you go away. There was no time in that old way of running the world for us to look for the really right character. We just hope for the best. But we don't need to do it that way anymore. There are so many different ways of checking what are people really like that we need to really look at that. So I keep coming back to this, that we must remember our legacy of the last several thousand years. It's tucked away at the back of our heads somewhere, and it keeps popping out. Whenever you say, this is not right, this is not the way to do things, just think, pause for a second and say, is that me or is that 3,000 years ago?
I love that you made the correlation to time, because so much of what we do in our lives, but especially in education, is based on time, right? How much time you spend in a calendar year, how much time you spend in a day, how much time you spend in a subject. And of course, there's a movement here in the United States to get rid of seat time, but people are holding on to that, right? Because it's an organizer of our lives. And you're saying, slow it down, kind of obliterate what time is and focus on the learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this fondness for time is actually caused by a quirk in physics. And single individual, I think, Mr. Galileo. See, he showed us how to measure time.
Right.
And that then reduced to the clock. We don't think of what an incredible effect the clock has had on us.
We take it for granted that it's just how the world runs.
We eat and sleep by the clock.
Yeah.
You know, but our bodies don't have, I mean, they have their own internal clocks built in. We stopped listening to them because we have these little pendulum-based things.
Right, right. No, it's a great insight. Let's switch over to school in the cloud a little bit. And I'm a big fan of sort of the granny cloud. And I love that today you dubbed it sort of the admiration engine. I don't know if those two words went together, but I think it's a great way of saying it, an admiration engine. And I think that's so simple and obvious. And I'm wondering why you think that something so simple is so hard for us to do in education.
I can't help but again go back. When you run a system using people, then you need people to be identical. But people are not born identical. To make them identical, you can't do that with admiration. You have to do that with discipline. You have to say, sit down, don't talk, get up, do what I tell you to do. I'm not going to blame anything. I'm going to say there was no other way to run the show before. So, you know, if you had to hire a sailor or train a sailor, you had to train them with discipline, not with admiration. But if you have to develop a computer programmer, you can't do that by making him, you know, marching him up and down the aisle and sitting down and standing up and doing whatever you tell them. You have to leave him alone. So it's a different skill.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Seoul, a lot of the work that you've done with School in the Cloud and Seoul is in developing countries. And I'm wondering if you think that there's a greater opportunity to implement these ideas there because they're leapfrogging. They don't have that education infrastructure maybe that places like Europe and the United States might. Do you think it's easier to do there?
I started out that way, but it's actually not entirely true what you're saying. I'll tell you why. When I started out, I had no option but to go to those places where the government would say, do what you like in that place, because we haven't been able to do anything over there. So that's like Korakati, that village I showed you. I mean, there's no electricity, there's no internet, there's no school, there's no healthcare. Anything you do will be for the good. So that was my easy way out of being allowed to try it. But having done that, and when I went to England, and when the English school teachers, they did a marvelous thing. I mean, they're the ones who showed me that it works even better inside the regular schooling system if it's applied properly. You know, there's one teacher, Emma Crawley, and myself, we showed that over and over again, that you can bring the hole in the wall into the classroom. And then I spent a year at MIT, during which time many of the American schools came to know that I was sitting there in Boston, so they started calling me, and I got my chance to meet many of the American schools. And it just flies. You know, the method, particularly with 8, 9-year-old little American children, they love to be free. And they can't believe that there's this guy, and they look at me as pretty exotic. You know, this guy from India who's a professor in England has come to our school and is telling us we can do what the hell we like.
Right.
You know? So they love it. And I've done, you know, one after the other. The last one, which is already there on the internet, is an experiment I did in a New Jersey school. The question was, why is the blue whale the biggest animal on the planet? And they did a marvelous job, but they couldn't quite get to the answer, mainly because there is no answer. So, I mean, nobody knows. So they went to a large whale. But what they didn't know was that the same experiment was being done simultaneously in Ghana, in Africa, in a poor school. And I have this wonderful video of 2 children from both countries saying exactly the same thing.
Wow. Wow. So we've over-engineered education. We have all these standards here in the United States, right? How do we make this work in the standards-driven environment we have today?
We do need a world with standards, but the nature, purpose, and definition of standards themselves need to be re-examined in view of the cloud. And we have to ask some very fundamental questions about privacy, about truth, that sort of thing. What does a license mean on the internet? Maybe we should just do away with it and bring up other standards, perhaps more human standards. For instance, and I've done this with children in England, what does altruism mean? Why do we have it? Why did it evolve? I think that's a better way of teaching standards, of teaching goodness, if you like, rather than to say, you know, be good, otherwise you'll go to hell. You know, something like that.
Well, yeah, and there's a big movement here in the United States, obviously, around grit and perseverance and resiliency. And what I hear you saying is that it's those intangibles that will help people succeed much more than the standards themselves.
Sometimes I know you're going to think, well, what else can this guy say? But sometimes I feel that looking a little bit more towards the older Eastern cultures might help the whole situation. I know, for example, a beautiful thing in a school in India where my son used to go, where the message was, if the inputs from the outside world at some point in time are hurting, then go inside. It's such a gentle way, instead of saying, you know, fight back with everything you've got and so on and so forth. So maybe one should try to look back, because there were those places where they tried to solve this problem of excessive violent behavior or aggressive behavior, and they did have methods. So maybe we should mix the two things together.
Yeah, instead of spreading really this Western style of education, learn from what other people have learned over hundreds and thousands of years.
Yes, and to my Eastern friends, I would say that, I mean, let's also realize that we've got to do the other way about, because, I mean, the Eastern gentleness can often also reduce to, sleeping all afternoon and not doing a stroke of work. So we need to learn to change that from your cultures.
So one last question as we wrap up here. Obviously, your message is very inspiring, inspiring people all across the world, inspiring people here at Q. But some people might say, but what can I do tomorrow? I'm a classroom teacher. I teach high school science. I've got these standards. I've got these expectations. I have parents telling me my kid has to go to college, right? But what would you recommend as the first step?
It's a big question. But while listening to you, I'll just tell you what came to the top of my mind when I was listening to you. What came to the top of my mind is, ask the children. That's the first thing I think we should do. Ask them what school should be like. ask them what's wrong, ask them what's right, ask them what curriculum means, what should it be, ask them about exams. Why don't we like exams? What can we do to exams so that we like them? That way. We do too little of it. I have done a bit, and if they see your trust, I can guarantee they will return it.
That's great. Inquiry-driven education, right? You put it right back on them. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for not only the work that you're doing around the world and the inspiring message that you're promoting, but also for bringing that message to our community here at CUE.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
For everyone here at the CUE conference, I'm Chris Walsh with ITM Live, and we'll see you soon.
Looking for more great ideas? Check out infinite-thinking.org to catch all previous episodes, as well as links to everything featured in this show. And if you've got mad love for the ITM, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And remember, you are the infinite thinking machine.
The infinite thinking machine am I. No, that didn't come out all right. I am the infinite blinking machine. No, that didn't work too well either. Well, you know, as you can see it here.